thank you for joining us on our first episode of this webinar series. We as Muse Afrika wanted to wish you a very, very happy Women's Month. This is kind of our gift to you from Muse. If you don't know what Muse Afrika is a very new non-profit organization that is working to fight gender-based violence through the education of our generation and the sourcing of necessary resources, but more so currently during COVID through the stimulation of conversation, which is exactly what we're doing with this series. It's a 4-part series, and this is episode 1. And we have 4 panelists, 1 facilitator by the name of Kago Motlhabane. And I'm very excited to hear what these amazing panelists have in store for us. And I hope you guys are excited as I am. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kago.
Hi guys, so my name is Kago. I'll be your facilitator for this Zoom call, and I'm joined by 4 amazing panelists. We have Tarika, we have Slee, and we have Beverly and Paemo as well. So how this is going to work really is we have a set of questions that we as Muse would like to ask the panelists, but you guys as viewers are allowed to kind of send in your questions on the chat room. We do have someone looking at your questions over on the chat room. And yeah, this is just a kind of a conversation that we wanted to have with these panelists, just in terms of defining what is gender-based violence, and just so that we're all kind of on the same page. Each episode, as you guys have probably seen on our social media, has a different theme, has a different kind of goal behind each of them. So for this first episode, we really just wanted to define gender-based violence, so that we're all on the same page and we're all aware on like what we're trying to do with all of these. And yeah, without further ado, I think I'm going to turn to our panelists now to just kind of give you guys a brief introduction on who they are and what they're all about. And yeah, so I'm going to ask Slee to start us off and introduce herself.
Okay, so hey guys, my name is Slee and I'm a master's by research students. So I see some of my students are here because I'm also a tutor. So I tutor at WITS. I've tutored first years, second years, and tutoring now 3rd years. So shout out to my 3rd years who are here in this webinar. And also shout out to my friends and family. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'm also an intern at Young Aspiring Thinkers, which is a non-profit organization. And yeah, that's basically me. Oh yes, I'm also doing gender-based violence as my research for my master's, but specifically focusing on men as allies. So how can men actually make a difference in fighting against GBV? So yeah, guys, that is me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Slee. Next, I'm going to ask Tarika to introduce herself.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Tarika. I'm 20 years old. I began getting involved in anti-GBV sort of activism in high school when I started a nonprofit. The nonprofit, it was called Afrofeminism. Right now, I've been taking a gap year and I'm working at an all-female architecture firm that deals in the spaces of sort of spatial social justice. Yeah, and this is obviously before I head off to college in the US. And I think that's me.
All right, awesome. Next, I'm going to throw it over to Beverly. Can you please introduce?
Hi, everyone. I'm Beverly. I am a whole lot of things, but for purposes of this discussion, I am a health professional. I also am a therapist with particular interest in GBV and dealing with GBV victims and survivors. I also am an activist, also with particular interest in GBV. Yeah, and thank you so much for having me on your panel.
Thank you for being with us. Next, I'm going to ask Paemo to please introduce.
I'm sorry for my setup issues. My computer just wasn't working. But hi guys, I'm Paemo. I'm a second-year engineering student at WITS. Currently, at the moment, my personal time, I'm working on a startup app that focuses on women's safety as well as women's self-defense, and really just putting safety back into the hands of African women specifically. And it really works with organizations such as Rape Crisis and also the Tears organization. So yeah, that's basically it.
Okay, thank you everyone. All right, those are the introductions from our panelists, and without further ado, I think I'm going to kick us off with our first question. So the first question that I have for you guys is is, from the very beginning, how would you define gender-based violence? One who would like to start us off.
Okay, I could actually start us off. So basically with GBV, it's pretty much like a complex topic, right? So we're looking at different aspects of GBV. You're looking at, you know, the physical aspects, the emotional aspects, because I think a lot of us tend to focus on kind of the sexual abuse, which is very prominent in South Africa. So gender-based violence is basically violence against women, right? So it's violence that has been imposed upon women. Hence the gender aspects of gender-based violence. So you have these kind of different aspects where there's emotional violence, which is linked to psychological violence. Then you have the physical violence, which is in the case of rape, which is very, once again, like very prominent in South Africa. We have the leading statistics in rape. And so you have the femicide, right, which is something that's quite new, right, the term where the femicide rates in South Africa is skyrocketing. So I guess in a nutshell, that's how I would define it, but there's different aspects of gender-based violence, but I think the link in that is the abuse towards women, so yeah.
Yes, thank you. Would anyone like to add to that? Bev, I see you. Oh, you're muted at the moment.
Oh, my microphone was giving me trouble. I'm sorry.
Okay, no stress. Yes,
so just to add to what Slee was saying, it really is violence that is directed at a person based on their gender. Okay, so it is any person is susceptible. However, the feminine gender is the gender that's more susceptible, and it is something that we need to stress, that it is gender, because it also is directed at people whose gender may not necessarily fall within some definition that other people are comfortable with. And this is where your LGBTIQ plus community is also vulnerable. So it isn't really violence on females, because a female is a person who biologically carries the female sex. But we're talking about gender, and gender is a social construct, isn't it? So any person that identifies with the feminine, as in woman, would be also susceptible. Can I just quickly say that males and men also are also and can be victims as well. However, on the balance of scale in terms of the majority of the weight, as to where it falls, it is the women gender, the feminine gender, that is more susceptible, and that's why you will always hear that it's violence against women all the time. It is violence against women, violence against women. It's because of the gender women as opposed to the anatomy female. This also applies to children, because with children as well, it is more the girl child that you will find being susceptible and being mostly a victim of gender-based violence. So we really do always like to stress that, because you will find there are groups, if you look around social media, you'll find there are groups that will not even write women with an A or an E, because they want to specifically be accommodating of other people that may not necessarily appear or look like what you normally, or let me not say normally, what you would find generally being defined as women. So your non-binary community, your intersex community, your gender non-specific people, those your trans gender community, those communities are part of the definition as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
Oh, before we go, Gacho, I'm sorry. I'm getting old. Just to maybe quickly just run through the different types of gender violence. Lee also has already done that. And yes, indeed, the physical side is the most prominent one that you will find, where you are beaten up, where you are raped. But basically, you have physical, you have social, you have psychological, you have emotional, you have spiritual, financial, and you have medical as well. You have medical gender-based violence as well. So I'll do that again. It's physical, it is social, it is emotional, it is psychological, it is financial, it is spiritual, and you have medical.
Medical, what would that mean?
So medical gender-based violence you will find, for instance, in relation or in situations to medical services, and this would usually be done by usually a male, because it would be within a relationship, or it would be within a tradition or a cultural practice, or at least it would be rationalized as such. And then there's also the gynecological side of it, where women, gynecology, they would be going in either for gynecological care or for going for obstetric care. That'd be when you're pregnant and you're needing, you know, your antenatal class, clinic and all that, and the services there. And you have women that are abused at that level, abused as part of the practice. So you would go in needing an exam, and the exam is very, very intrusive, invasive, in that it is your private part. We can't speak freely, no? So it is your private parts that the practitioner needs to access, and they would access that, but they would also, you know, have this lacing of touching inappropriately, even saying inappropriate things as you're being examined and as you're supposed to be getting the service. And of course, even when you're going, a young person going in for the family planning, whichever selection they have, their devices, their meds, their injections, and you have language being used on them like, you are loose, you know, what are you doing here? You're too young to be doing this. Oh, you are, you think you're old enough and all that, but it's said in a manner that is violent. Okay, because remember that it starts with language. It's not just the act. By the time you get to the act, you've been through the language, you've been through the looks, you've been through the gestures. And by the time it gets physical, all of that you've been through. And it's important for us to remember this, guys, because it tends to be watered down, because you know what can you show for it? You don't have a physical thing to say somebody touched me, okay? Unless they like really pinched you or exerted force. So it becomes difficult to say that you were abused. You go into your gynae, you come out, they say, but I had to put my fingers up you. But they don't explain that they put the fingers and did something extra while the fingers were in there doing what they need to do to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for that in-depth analysis. Tiki and Paimo, do you guys have anything else you'd like to add or ask with regard to the definition of gender-based violence?
No.
I'm all good.
We're all good. All right, cool. Thank you so much for that. So our second question, now that we've defined gender-based violence, yes, Tarika, yes.
Taho, sorry. Just to create a safer space, if possible, could we please just define our pronouns?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Thank you for bringing that up.
I'm she, her.
She, her. Slee?
Yeah.
Her. She,
her as
her.
well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I myself am also she, her. Dev?
She, her.
Paimo?
He, him.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Thank you for bringing that up, Tarika.
Oh,
Sure.
thank you. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So the second question, now that we've defined what gender-based violence is, what's the big fuss? Why should we care? Or why shouldn't we care? Who would like to start us off with that one?
Paimo should start.
Well, in my personal opinion, in terms of gender-based violence and why we should care, is because gender-based violence has kind of turned into a seasonal thing. It reminds me somewhat of the summers, basically, of autumn, winter, and so forth. In the sense that around this time of year, around the August, September, we only start reposting people who are missing. We only start talking about the women that are dying around us daily and so forth and so on. And leading up to Women's Month, we get all these big ideas. Everyone has a campaign, everyone does this and this and this. And then it flutters out around about September, and then we almost forget. And then we go into the same cycle of the same thing happening again. And then we're shocked when we see the same outcomes, when we see women being murdered just for the sake of their gender, just because their relationship to a man has put them in so much danger, that we haven't changed the way that men need to behave in society, and we've accepted that as our society. And that's one of our biggest problems as men, myself included, that we ourselves have found our position as a position of privilege, knowing what oppression feels like, being black men or being a man of color or being an LGBTQ man, but knowing that we would never want to put ourselves in the same position as a woman, because we have to ask ourselves the question of saying, would you rather be a man or a woman? You know, as a man, you're always going to choose a position of a man because you know how badly women are treated, but you know that you're not going to do everything in your capacity to change that way until it's someone that's in your relationship or someone who's close to your heart or your family.
Thank you for that. Yes, true. Is there anyone else who would like to answer that question?
Yeah, I would like to say, oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was saying just before.
No, go ahead, Slee.
You again, Beverly. I just wanted to see if Slee had anything to say. Yes.
Yeah, no, just going back to what Paimon said, is that the idea of us being humans, right? So we should care because we're human beings. And I think there's a misconception of GBV being a woman's issue and a woman's problem, to the point where you find that a lot of these sort of campaigns is almost like, women, do something to stop GBV. And in fact, we should be like, men, please help, do something to stop GBV. Because why? It's majority of the time, men are the perpetrators of violence. And I think that's where we have to recognize the humanity aspects of it. We have to recognize that we should care because A, we're human beings. We should also care because B, I mean, gender-based violence in South Africa is horrific. So there's also context as well, like what's happening around us. You see all these news reports about GBV, about somebody went missing, you know, somebody passed away, all those kind of things. So why we should care is because we are human beings and it's happening around us. So it's something that we can't ignore. It's pretty much in our face that, wait a minute, we need to talk about this. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Slee.
Yeah, definitely.
Bev, I see your hands up. Would you like to?
Sorry. I'm right in there with Paimon and Slee, and I think that we should care because, hey, it could be you next. Remember that the unfortunate, and this is unfortunate, part of GBV is that before we all kind of really became uncomfortable with it because it was straight up in our faces, like Slee said, we always tended to think it's over there. It's not here. It's over there. And the perpetrator is a stranger, so I must watch that I don't go to Noord taxi rank. I must watch that I don't go to this part of this township and all that thing, until we got to realize that it is that very uncle that drives you to school every day. It is your father, your stepfather. It is your brother. It is your neighbor. It is everybody.
It's true.
So everybody and anybody is at risk. Okay. And when you realize that, and I see on the 1st of August 2018, we had this whole national shutdown march and all that. And I was lucky enough to be on the team that organized the Durban part. And I remember giving input and saying, before in 1956, when the women of South Africa took to the streets, and Paimon said that before, you know, we black and we have this history that we have, and thank you for saying that. In 1956, the women knew who the enemy was. The enemy was out there. It was apartheid. The enemy was there. It was the people who came from wherever they came from to basically rape the women as part of the attack on the black majority at the time. 2018, the enemy is in your bed. The enemy is your boyfriend. The enemy is your girlfriend. The enemy is under the same roof as you. The enemy is the person that was supposed to take care of you, protect you, and defend you. So you should be worried. You should give a
Yes.
damn. You should
Yes.
fuss about this, and you
Okay.
should partake of it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Beverly. Tarika, I see your hands up. What would you like to add?
I think one of the reasons we should care is obviously because every single human being deserves their basic human rights. But especially in terms of GBV and particularly oppression against women, it's been carrying on for centuries. So not only is it an incredibly long issue in terms of being around in humanitarian sort of circles, but it's deeply social and psychological. So we kind of have to start detangling that from our very DNA. And one of the reasons I think particularly we need to care about it in 2020 is because we know, for example, the South African Constitution is incredibly progressive when it comes to women's rights. I would say like section 9, 10, 11, and 12 basically speak about equality, and it's incredibly progressive. I would say we should care because even within that written legal document, we still have a terrible, terrible problem within South Africa. So what does it mean? Like we have to approach it from many different directions because even when it's written in the Constitution, it's not enough.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you. Any last remarks on that before we move on? Is everyone good? Okay. All right. Thank you. Someone? Yes? No?
Yeah. I was just going to say,
Okay.
but we also just, as we move along, and I hope there is a question around it to speak about what entrenches gender-based violence in our society. Because that is going to be critical as we lead on to how then do we address it? What do we do to restitute the situation? That's going to be very, very important for us to look at, please. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Payamo, was your hand up there just now? Or are you okay?
I was just saying, I'm all good.
Okay, sweet. Okay, thank you for that. So my next question for you guys is, so the depiction of gender-based violence in the media, do you think it is helpful or harmful to the fight against gender-based violence? Yes, Tarika.
How many marks did we get for that?
That's a really good question, actually.
It is.
It's really good.
Take some time. Take some time to think about it. Tarika, I did see your hand up. What would you like to say?
I think it can be helpful, especially in terms of social media platforms. I mean, if you think about the tragic murder of Uyinene, it definitely spread on social media, particularly Instagram was where it started when she went missing. So it becomes quite an interesting tool to use, especially for Black voices and for Black women's voices. So I think in that way, like it is helpful, and it can be used actually to like gather people together, particularly actually recently for these protests, these anti-GBV protests. It was, I mean, Instagram was a really great way to get people organized, get people together despite the lockdown regulations. So yeah, I think it can be like largely helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Is there any way you feel that it could be harmful, or that you can think of yourself that you think that social media could be a harmful tool towards the fight?
I would say it could be harmful in terms of tokenism. So a lot more people seem to be involved than they actually are, and it's definitely like it's a show, and I think that's a big problem because I don't think tokenism can be accepted in this movement or at least in this struggle.
Yeah.
And also it
yes, go for it.
Gosh, forget the house rules. It also can kind of skew the picture a bit. There's a case of a leader of the African National Congress in KZN, and the young lady that was said to be an intern who had been going into hospitals in KZN, pretending to be an intern. Now, I don't know if you all have seen that story, but
Yes.
You did, no? The sad part for us is that the way the story really started was around GBV, okay, with the woman being on the receiving end. But when it went to the media, it only was painting her, one, nameless.
Mm.
She was called names as opposed to her actual name. At no point did they use her name, just only in the headlines. She was called an imposter and a whole lot of things, okay? That
I'm
was
sorry,
number one.
I'm sorry, Beverly. Can I just ask you to just elaborate on her story before you kind of go on
Oh, sorry. Okay.
on her thing, just
So,
for those who haven't heard it before, read about it.
okay, cool. Okay, cool. I'm gonna try to make it very short, but this
Yes,
young
please.
lady had a romantic, shall I say, intimate relationship with one of the leaders of the African National Congress who's also an MP, by the way. Actually, he's actually in the national in national cabinet. Of course, cabinet is national, in cabinet, and they then got into a situation. Jada would call it entanglement. It's a situation nonetheless, and she then sent out her story talking about how this man had made her pregnant and had insisted that she abort the baby because, of course, he's married. Surprise, surprise, and she in fact there's been let's call it what it is. That's another thing. Let's call it what it is. She then got counter responses from him, of course, when he was explaining that all of that is not true and all that and whatever. But other stories were coming out from young ladies on campus and campuses who were also saying that had a similar experience with the very same gentleman. And they also had said that he had raped them, not all of them, but some of them. But there was this trend that he would start a relationship with you, and the minute there is a baby involved, the women say he would then ask you to abort the baby. Now, this young lady had refused to do so, and so it got messy. When it got to the media was only speaking. Oh, then he also went and put out a voice note talking about his wife and how she was being supportive of him, and all of these women are sluts, and they throw themselves at leaders because they're looking for money and all that kind of support. And he feels very, very clear in his position that he's not going to be toppled over by this young little girl. And I can forward these to people if they wanted to. It's in the public domain anyway. So the media only spoke about how she was an imposter and how she was trying to basically blackmail the leader of the African National Congress, who is also in the cabinet. So the media then, when it does that, it obviously nullifies what our approach is as activists, because for us, we first believe the victim. No matter what, we first believe the victim, and then as facts come through, of course, we then, will go with the facts, not anything else, just the facts. But first believe the victim. And we move on from there. So yeah, that was the story with this, and the media was quite scathing, actually. Now, if you look at that, who is going to want to come up and tell stories and tell about their experiences if that is what they can experience? Because that is another form of abuse, isn't it? Now, you've already been abused, and now you come up and tell because activists are saying to you, please tell so we can support you, so we can, and all that. And researchers are saying, please tell so we can know the statistics. But you tell, and this is what happens to you.
So just an additional question to that, would you say, and I'm asking any one of the panelists here, would you say that whoever's doing the reporting, that plays a very large role in whether they paint GBV as a good thing or as a bad thing? And in those situations, what do you think as activists you should maybe consider, or what you should do in those cases? If anyone has any thoughts of that.
Yeah, no, that is a good question, actually, because you are right in that there's a certain amount of influence that the reporter has. You may find that the reporter may be very directly affected by situations in concern with GBV. And so they may write reports from an emotional standpoint to an extent. So that could definitely like play out how, for instance, the victim is portrayed in the media upfront versus how the perpetrator is portrayed, right? So in certain cases in the media, you have a situation where, as you were saying, Beverly, that the victim, it's almost like they kind of dig up into the past of the victim to an extent. So they would say things like irrelevant things, like this victim had, you know, X amount of children with X amount of lovers. And you're thinking to yourself, why would you include those kind of, you know, historical facts? Like the issue is now, the issue is that I was abused and this is what happened to me. And yet you include these things. And this is what they happen also in law when they go into court cases and you standing there dealing with a rape case. And it's like the most traumatizing thing that you can ever be in. Like, we've seen this happening countless of times, even with the Zuma issue, the Zuma case. It's these things where there's that problem, right? Where how the victim is portrayed versus how the perpetrator is portrayed. So definitely I agree with what you're saying, Gaho, about that, in that perhaps maybe the reporter might come in, maybe this person is indirectly affected by GBV. So they might come in a more, perhaps an objective approach. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you in that there's a different way that people portray cases like that. And it could either be to the benefit of the victim or, you know, it could be a disadvantage, essentially. So yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Tarika, I saw you first, and then we'll do Paimo and then Beverly again. Yes, Tarika.
I just wanted to mention, if we're kind of diverting away from just news as media, I actually wanted to say that I do think social media can be incredibly damaging for the GBV movement, which I didn't mention, because there is a lot, especially if you're looking in the corners of the internet, for example. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of 4chan. There's a lot of alt-right ideology on sites like that, but in a way it also gets leaked onto Facebook. So there are a lot of articles that do not go fact-checked, and those can become viral. And I think that's a massive problem, because that breeds hatred, definitely for against feminists, but also in terms of just general hatred for an anti-GBV movement. So I think that is a problem, especially actually on Twitter, because this was quite a big problem on Twitter. So yeah, I would say actually it can also be damaging.
Okay, all right, thank you. Paimo, yes.
In terms of, for example, what Bev was saying about the positionality of the leader and this woman being scrutinized and being written about like this and so forth, I think a good example of that also goes into play of the Oscar Stories case of femicide, where as soon as rape comes into the picture, it's nothing like murder or any other crime. It's more one of saying, we have to scrutinize what type of person is if they're worthy to be charged with rape, not if they're guilty of rape. Because many a time when the paper starts, it always starts saying that this person, this man in many a case, is the president of the country. He's our South Africa's top athlete. He's this, he's that, he's done so much for the country. And there's all these other factors that when you're reading the article, subliminally, the journalism is already telling you whose side to pick before anything else, because then automatically you're putting it and saying is that a powerful member who runs our society is being manipulated by someone who wants what they have. But instead, it's rather someone who is just like any of us in society, who is a part of society, who is not above the law, not above God, none of that, is being given an opportunity outright because of their position in society, not because we have a fair justice system in that sense. And I think, especially in the case of rape, is very one where we tend to hold the woman as an object rather than the subject of the actual situation.
So would it be safe to say that it's more of a thing of when we look at the perpetrator, we first look at more what he stands to lose if these allegations are true, and that we hold a higher priority over what trauma this individual has been through if these allegations are true. Would you say that that's kind of the summation of that? Okay. Yes, Tarika.
Just a quick point. leading on the thread from, I think it's interesting that Payoma mentioned Oscar Pistorius, and it was something I considered when the Oscar Pistorius case was running. There was almost multiple YouTube videos that were kind of following the case.
Yeah.
And something I found to be a problem with that was it was becoming some sort of entertainment, which I felt like made it completely removed from the fact that this woman had been murdered. And I found it similar to the OJ Simpson case,
Yes.
because back then that was also recorded as if it was a television series or a television show, completely removed from the fact that a woman had been killed. So I think the Oscar Pistorius case is an issue in terms that the media actually like showed it as entertainment in some kind of warfare.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Is there any more remarks on this before we move on?
A quick one. I was just going to say,
Yes.
Kaho, that just following through on what Payoma said, because I think that's exactly for me how it comes out. But also, you will find even when they report about the women as well, you will find adjectives like the beautiful whomever, a young, talented, whatever, as if to say, if you don't qualify, for those adjectives, then we shouldn't really be talking about you. And this became very contentious, for instance, when it was, and the good Lord raised her soul with Thingy's case in UCT. You just mentioned it now. Yeah. And at the time, there were 3 women in KZN. 3 that had gone missing, and 2 of them were found raped and killed, and one of them was only raped and she was still alive. And none of them made the media. And when they did make the media, it was tiny little things like this, and nothing about the beautiful student at varsity and all that there. Let's take it a little further. Then we have the president, who then goes and visits only certain cases. And the question becomes, how does he decide on which cases to go to? Is it because the media punted it so much? Is it because it was all over social media? Because not everybody, even in 2020, is able to afford the data, the airtime, the types of phones that's going to allow you to have access to media generally, and of course social media as well. So people are not everybody can just, go on there and their cases are up there. So it kind of hurts a little bit to say, yes, he should attend to these matters, but if he's going to make physical representation, to certain cases, it's a bit of an issue. Talking about overseas cases and all that, and it being a show, the same thing applies to what's his name, R. Kelly. The women were vilified. Nothing about what he did. Okay, the same with this white guy. What is his name? Sorry, man, I've just forgotten his name. But it's those kinds of situations that we're talking about. And women then go through another bit of abuse called secondary abuse. As, they go through the cases like that. The Omotoso case, you have people that are torn in the middle about it. And that's why I was asking that we go to all these factors that kind of predispose and also make these situations worse. And that Omotoso case as well. There were people, and for instance, we say, why do women not support other women in these cases? It's because it is such an intricately psychological issue. Somebody mentioned it earlier. It's not just a linear thing. It's got all these dimensions to it, and I'm hoping that you guys, if I can sneak this in, I'm hoping that you guys don't stop these conversations so you can explore all of these things a little bit further and further and further, in your series.
Okay, thank you so much. So what I'm gathering from you guys is that, the media in all forms, the news, social media, entertainment, all of it, it's more of a double-edged sword, really, where it's like what you're saying, that it tends to be seasonal a lot of the time, and it's things that are trending that get traction, but there are many names that never make it onto screens, onto the hashtags or any of that. And we unfortunately lose those names, and we don't know just how much it is. And I think it's sometimes difficult when we only focus on the names, and that we that it's really just the tip of the iceberg. You know what I mean? There are so many that we don't hear about. you know, on the other hand, the media is incredibly helpful, as Tarika said,
Yes. Yes.
spreading awareness and organizing things like this. You know, with everyone in lockdown, social media was our primary way of promoting this particular conversation. So I do hear all of you. Thank you for that. So the next question is, according to Stat South Africa's Crime Against Women in South Africa 2018 report, yes, men are the perpetrators of, are the main perpetrators of gender-based violence, but according to those stats, there are more men being murdered than women. In light of everything we've just discussed, what would you make of this? How does this make you feel?
Can I start on this one? For this one, I feel as if, in terms of the casing that we have to kind of put it in, we put, as one is saying, there's murders, there's prison fights, and there's so many other factors that lead to the death of people overall.
Yeah.
And I feel that it is well known that our country is one of the most dangerous, as we know. Johannesburg being the epicenter of that, we know this. And men and women become, like, as much as you don't want to be a part of it, it can just happen suddenly, and it happens. And in terms of that case of saying, okay, more men are murdered overall, in terms of all these subcategories and different categories, is one where we can't deny the fact of saying that men are murdered for different reasons alongside men. As a man, I know that if I go into a space where there's a gang and I bump and I hit someone like this, there's a chance of me being murdered. But as a woman, just walking to and from your home, if you have, let's say, a shop around the corner, there's a chance of you being murdered. And many of the time, I feel as if people bring up those stats and say that, you see, you can't really call gender-based violence an issue if more men are dying. But it's very different contexts, because you got to take a holistic view towards it, of saying that as much as you want to say men are being the ones being killed, as a man, there are certain situations that I don't feel safe. However, that's almost half the situations that a woman has to go through, because a woman almost on her daily basis, just in her home, when there's no one in her home, many a time it's one of those ways, will she even feel safe? So yeah.
Thank you for that. Does anyone have anything to add to that? Yes, Tarika.
So yeah, I agree with what Payamo was saying. Statistically, yes, men do get killed like more frequently, but I would say it's not because of their gender. So the kind of attacks that happen in comparison, let's say, between a man and a woman can vary by a great degree. So I mean, if you think about it, let's think about what happens in the home with gender-based violence. Usually, like, the woman is bearing the brunt, or the girl child is bearing the brunt. If you think of FGM or genital mutilation, usually the female child is bearing the brunt. If you think about sex trafficking, usually the woman, the girl, is bearing the brunt. So I mean, the thing is, gender-based violence isn't just about murder. It's about the collective violence against women. And men simply do not face that kind of oppression. It's just they don't face it, despite facing various forms of violence. It's not because of their gender.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yes, Bev.
And just a quick one to say, and again, it's one of those things that for me would be nice to have its own time allocated. The dynamic about gender-based violence is that it doesn't end with what has been said or done to the person. The impact of it reverberates through your life. It is that one thing that happens once, but impacts and affects you for as long as you live. And it might actually be the reason your life ends at the time that it does, and not at the hands of the perpetrator. It's the one cut that never ever heals, because forever in your life, you're going to have what we call triggers. A trigger is something that reminds you of that particular event or events that happened in your life. People's psychological composition changes completely. People even have personality changes. People become totally different after GBV.
Mm.
So crime, if somebody steals your purse, if somebody, you may be able to live through that and actually fully recover, not with gender-based violence. Not with gender-based violence. And that is what we need to, that's why we need to give a damn about it. That's why it is such a fuss. That's why it is such a fuss. Because it affects you for the rest of your life, for the rest of your life, for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Okay, thank you. So is there any more additional remarks from the panelists before we move on from that? Or are we all good? Okay. Just a follow-up question from me. What would your response be to someone, and Paimo kind of touched on this, but what would your response be to someone who uses those statistics as a way of kind of nullifying the conversation of case violence?
Yeah. I think, I think the question was actually quite an interesting one, because it kind of goes back to, and I don't know if I'm linking this right, but it's like the whole all lives matter kind of concept.
Yes.
Just sort of, putting it in it's all the same. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Men are also getting murdered. Women are getting murdered. Everyone is getting murdered.
Yeah.
And that's the issue, right? We can't just put it in the same almost like wavelength where this whole idea of all lives matter now, and obviously we're fighting for Black lives. So it's almost like that to show that there's these statistics of, well, men are getting murdered, they're getting murdered more. And as Paimo said very nicely, is that there's different context of how men are getting murdered. But we're focusing here on GBV. And as you can see in GBV, statistics are showing us that women are carrying the brunt, basically. They are getting murdered. That's girls.
Because they're women.
Exactly, because they're women. So, so I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes.
I think something that's very important to address in terms of those arguments coming forth, particularly about this issue, is that often, I mean, in the comments section, if for example, there's a post about a woman who's been raped, you'll usually find like some man in the comments section kind of saying, but men get raped too. And that's undoubtable. Men get raped, and there's a lot of stigma around it, which also needs to get fixed and needs to get unpacked. But my issue is often those kinds of arguments, and I did see an argument like that in the chat, comes up when we're talking about this and not as an independent argument. And I think that's a problem, because if it is a problem we want to talk about, that independent argument should be happening, it should be public, not just in rebuttal to this. Because what does it mean if you're just using that argument in rebuttal to this? I think that's my comment.
I feel like in some instances, in some lights, it means you really don't care about the men rape victims if
definitely
we only ever bring it up when we're talking about females. Thank you. Yes, Beverly.
To add to everybody's points, it's also that excuse me, oh my goodness, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Oh Jesus, and that just made me lose my train of thought too. But I was gonna say, all respect to researchers, because we need statistics, because they give you an indication of situations, But for me, let me not say but. For me, I always stress that we should please not stake our lives on statistics, because the other dynamic about GBV is that people don't report. They don't report because there's shame in it. They don't report because they're afraid of secondary abuse. They're afraid. With good reason, dare I add, with good reason. So please, let's use statistics. Please, let's collect statistics. But please, let's also be mindful that our challenge is that cases don't get reported. That's another topic for another day. And oh my goodness. And it'll be very interesting, for instance, if you guys, I'm getting tingles, if you guys had a Zoom meeting just for people that want to tell these stories. And I can tell you this, just like with HIV we say, look to your left and look to your right. One of you is negative. One of you is negative. And with GBV as well, believe me, guys, one of you is the only person that can claim that so far they haven't had any type of gender-based violence. Again, because we don't look at those small little things, when somebody pinches your bum, when somebody slaps your behind and all that, they are, boys are just boys. You know how it is. We rationalize, we make excuses. We don't report things. We wait. Not we wait. Let me take that back. It's only because our understanding is not deep enough to understand that you don't only report when it's a big stabbing and a rape and all that there. All these other forms as well are in it. So it'd be great if you guys had a session like that. I'm imagining just what it is, because I think for you guys as activists also, it'll take you to the services you have on your campuses. Are they adequate? Are they friendly to people that have experienced GBV? Are they accessible? As in, can I trust that I can talk to you about it? Are there counselors and therapists available to deal with people's issues when they come to them? Because that's really where we should be leading to. At the end, we're going to talk about, of course, how to deal with it. But those are some of the things on campus that become very necessary and critical to have.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Any more remarks before we move on to the next question? No? Okay, cool. The next question is, South Africa has one of the highest rates of rape in the world. Why do you think that is? Do you want to start us off?
I'm going to make a cappuccino. I'm cutting my video. I'm going to make coffee. No, seriously, I'm going to make coffee. I'll be listening.
Okay, so I think not the interesting thing, the scary thing, if you look at statistics of nations that have undergone some kind of trauma or genocide, GBV is particularly bad during that time, and then often it gets worse after the fact. I mean, in South Africa particularly, we have a situation that's unique in that we live in a post-apartheid reality. So there's multiple levels that are creating this violence. There's multiple levels that are left over from apartheid that just contribute to the kind of scourge that is GBV in South Africa. So if you think about it, we can think about spatial apartheid. That is massive. I mean, in my opinion, I think urban planning is a huge part of GBV, an issue of GBV in South Africa. And that when I talk about spatial apartheid, I talk about, for example, the fact that we can have the Cape Flats and then we can have Clifton in Cape Town. Okay. So that kind of massive difference between crime difference, between gang violence, between poverty. So I think there's spatial apartheid to consider. There's economics, there's education, there's racial trauma. And then I think, and I'd like to touch on this briefly because I don't think I can go into it in depth like as me. But I do think there is something deeply psychological about post-apartheid sort of reality in South Africa, especially when it comes to men. I think there is an air of emasculation, particularly within communities that are poorer, or men who feel like they can't provide for their families. Often in households like that, either GBV becomes a problem in terms of intimate partner relationships, or it gets taken outside of the home. So I think emasculation is an interesting topic to talk about, but I also feel like it's not my space to explore any more than that. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
It is quite a loaded question, especially because I'm looking at it very intensely in my research. So the idea of patriarchal culture in South Africa is quite interesting because you look into this mindset of how are men like? Because technically speaking, the question that you're asking here is that why are men in South Africa different from other men? And so this idea of what Tarika was saying, of these different aspects of historical context, for instance, or the idea of racism and apartheid and the emasculating of men who were obviously affected by apartheid. And so there's a lot of things that we can sort of put into that as a sort of like reasons behind the GBV. So and also it's different men as well, because you have white men, Afrikaans men, you know, you have black masculinities with Xhosa men, Zulu men, Sotho men, all those kind of things. So it's this diversity of culture as well that plays a role. So the question is quite a complex question to answer. But I would say that the root causes of GBV has to deal with economic deprivation, for instance. So you have situations of poverty, of, you know, specifically in black masculinities. That's what I'm focusing on in my study. I look into township masculinity. And if you want to like read a book, there's a nice book from Malose Langa, who actually speaks about township masculinity molding black masculinity. So the idea of black men have these influences of township masculinity, and how in the township you pretty much you become violent to an extent to survive. You know, you in a way in which you join gangs and all those kind of things, gangsterism, as what Tarika was saying. So there's a lot of things that are involved in terms of the root causes of what you call it, of gender-based violence. There's also situations of lobola, which is a very debatable subject of, you know, you have to pay the bride price for the woman. So initially you own her because you have that payment of the bride price. Then there's, I think it's utwala or something like that, utwala, which is the whole idea of, I think it's in the Xhosa tradition, where the older man is married to the younger woman. So those kind of things where the woman, where the woman is essentially objectified, right?
Yes.
Because of the patriarchal culture that has been developed, or kind of been, you know, something that is definitely within this African context because of our culture as well. So there's a lot of things, guys. I did feminist theory, so I looked into the cultural aspects and how culture almost disadvantage the feminist ideals, or the feminist woman, or the feminist movements, or the pro-woman movements, kind of. So yeah, so in a nutshell, it's a lot of things. It's culture, it's historical context in terms of apartheid. So there's a lot of aspects that we have to consider.
Yeah. And I think also in, you know, kind of what you're saying, what both you and Tarika have said, that in South Africa being so deeply diverse and cultured as it is, there are many cultures and influences and intersections that come here that all kind of interweave themselves into this complicated web when we try to come down to the root cause of why we have gender-based violence, with all these viewpoints and cultures all coming into like almost under one South African roof almost. It's very complicated to like nut down to the root cause of it. Thank you, I hear that. Any more remarks, or shall we move on? Yes, Bev.
I find it interesting how we're talking about emasculation, and how we're talking about the men feeling like they're not fulfilling their role as providers. I find that very interesting, because that is precisely part of the equation, isn't it? Where we are ascribing these gender weights.
Yes, these gendered roles.
Exactly. Isn't it just,
you need to provide as the man. If you're not providing, then it's...
I know.
Yeah.
All hell breaks loose.
All hell breaks loose, right?
Do you?
Yeah.
My dear, I was hoping you'd be stomping by now, darling, talking about all that. Because
Tarika.
It is so embedded in our composition that we don't even see it when we do it, and when we enable it, we don't see that, because the minute you say he must provide, you are immediately saying the opposite should then be sitting and receiving. The opposite, that's not their part to provide. That's what you're saying by implication. Of course, this is not, I'm not saying this, you know, to as we would say, to galash what we're saying, because that is the reality. But patriarchy, as you said, Sleep, patriarchy has taught us that. The system we come from has taught us that, the apartheid system. I'm not going to repeat what Tarika said, because she's spot on completely. for me, I try, Kaho, not to speak about the causes, because I could very well say the cause is power. It's in your head. You make the decision, and that's it. You act on it. Because it is a decision. You make the decision, I'm going to look at you in this manner. I'm not going to question the person that said, oh, boys can be rough and tough. Boys must go and play with the guns and all that. I'm not going to question, even though I have been enlightened, I'm not going to question it, because you know what? It serves me. Okay? It serves me. I'm simply going to act, and I'm going to exert myself on you. Okay? So I much rather prefer to talk about the feeders of it, the environments that enable it. And that for me would be exactly what everybody said. Our past, culture, tradition, religion, the engendering of some of these, and the normalizing of bad behavior. And of course, the statuses of people, the socioeconomics and all of that. Because we bear children, we have to be home, yes, because there is a period that that's just nature. You're the one that has the breast to breastfeed the child, therefore you have to do exactly that. And you've got to eat, so somebody has got to be supporting that and going out to get the food and all of that. But I just wanted us to be aware that even in our language, we kind of just flow with it, when in fact sometimes we need to just hold back, come back and look at it and see how it is that the way we see things, the way we've been made to see things, as feeding the thing. Let's talk about, for instance, pornography. Let's talk about pornography. Some people have said, yes, Kaho, some people have said that pornography is the cause, but is it really? Is it really? Pornography is the capturing of sexual acts between people that may not exactly all of them be in agreement about it, but they're doing it for whatever purpose, and they capture it on video, and it's shown, and they say it's entertainment. Those that propagate it, they say it's entertainment. Okay? But when you analyze it from a feminist point of view, Tariq and Slee, you then would see the power relations there, okay? Because it really is centered around the man. But you will have us women saying, but I have a role there. I chose to do it, okay? I'm doing it because I want to do it. I'm asserting my feminism. I wanted to do it. How much of it really is it that, okay? Earlier on, we were speaking about, for instance, again, this power relation and the secondary abuse. That I'm a sex worker doesn't mean you now have, all the liberties to rape me. It doesn't mean that. That's my trade, okay? That's my commodity. I'm selling it, okay? It doesn't mean you can just come and take it because I'm giving it to everybody. There are rules in that game as well. So we go into all of those dynamics, and gender-based violence, guys. Oh my goodness, gender-based violence, man.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Tarika, yes, you've been wanting to say something.
Yeah, so I mean, the very beginning of Bev's conversation, I completely agree with. And I think I should have started off with a disclaimer that I really do not like the word emasculation, because if you think about it, there is an equivalent for what does it mean? Like, there is no word for what does losing womanhood mean? It almost means that losing manhood is important. Like, people need to have a word for it, and losing womanhood, what does that? So yeah, disclaimer, I don't like that word. And second of all, when I just wanted to clarify also, when I did say that men may feel emasculated because they aren't the providers of the home, I also do mean that is an assumption. So men feel emasculated, obviously, because there is this assumption that they should be. But I just wanted to clarify that, just to get it out there.
Thank you for that.
Oh no, we know.
Yes, Kaimo.
I've been hearing everyone else. I heard Tiki Slee and Auntie Bev, and you guys are all saying the right things. I think there's so many factors that lead up to this. It's also not one thing, but in my personal experience, I went to boys' school, for example, right? And one thing we all knew, but it was an unsaid thing, is the most fragile thing at a boys' school is definitely a man's ego. And in a society that we live in, men don't compare themselves over the physical, but rather what they can have and what they can provide many a time. And it's one of those feelings where, even going to a varsity space, sometimes you speak to people where they're not from societies that are as progressive, but rather see women in that sense of saying that you are subservient to your man. You will go to get a degree, but you're really just getting a good degree so that you can have a higher lobola. And many a time you meet people like that and you wonder to yourself, where does it actually fit in? And then when you start speaking, you start realizing, you start interacting with other people, you realize that many a time men's need for everyone to kind of love them and also have respect for them is quantified to how much they can provide and how much they can give to the people around them. For that sense. And I feel as if many a time, and I definitely agree with you, the word emasculation is really just to protect men's feeling of self, of saying that as a woman, you have to, your role in a relationship is to make sure that your man never feels emasculated, even if you're the one that's making the money, even if you're the one that's doing much of the work within actual being an adult within your relationship, or even holding the duties that a man is supposed to play or would generally play in society. But because the way society holds that, you have to protect men as if they're these precious carcasses and so forth. So definitely that's my thoughts.
Thank you for that.
Kaho?
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, can I just say, I wish what Tarika said could actually literally be put like on a on a poster of sorts, particularly with our past and and how that feeds into it. And because part of it also is that the one thing that the system did with women in the past was to break down a woman, you had to invade her in that manner. So rape, exactly what Tarika said, in war situations. Remember, apartheid is war, and it was war. And it was institutionalized. It still is. It hasn't gone away. It just has changed shape and form. And that was the most powerful tool ever. It still was. When you were arrested, you knew that to be made to talk and tell on your fellow students, you would be raped. You would be prodded with things. I'm not going to give the gory details. I don't want to give you all nightmares, but this is some of the stuff that we had to go through. Okay, so you knew. The one tool was that, and it hasn't gone out of things. But also remember that some of the men saw this. They were made to watch this. Okay, they were made to watch this. So you hear people say violence begets violence. And hurt people. I'm not going to debate the merits or demerits of it, but there is some evidence, researchersly, that shows that people that have been exposed to these kinds of images actually continue to kind of espouse them and to act them out, whether fantastically or whatever it is, but they would tend to come out doing the same thing as well. Just wanted to say that. Tarika, that needs to go on a plaque or something.
No, that is a very good point, especially because in my research, actually, I look into how, as you were saying, Bev, that hurt people. So in my research, I looked into how men who had a past where, for instance, they were either abused or something like that when they were young, eventually become the abusers. So I think that in itself, those particular men need some form of counseling so that they can be able to sort of, transform or kind of, heal from what had happened in their past so that they don't become the perpetrators. Because a lot of those cases where you do find that they were abused in the past and didn't exactly have that therapeutic, therapeutic session where they were able to heal from that abuse. So
Except it's not an excuse either, no? It's not.
That's true.
It's also not a pass.
That's very
it's
true.
Not a pass to say, oh, because you were hurt, you can. We understand. No, that's not what it is.
No.
So just I just wanted us to put a rider, just in case somebody else doesn't understand that we have a rider on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Say,
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Tarika.
Yes, Lee, I completely agree with you. I think it definitely also goes back to the point that if a man or a boy is abused or has, for example, witnessed maybe domestic abuse in his household,
Yes.
the
Yes.
issue with toxic masculinity and masculinity kind of being, I mean, I think Chimamanda Adichie describes it as a cold, small cage.
Yes.
You cannot, I mean, the majority of men, there's a huge stigma about talking about sexual abuse. You most probably will get mocked or feel emasculated. And then of course, like, what does therapy mean for young men and young boys? Like, do men actually go to therapy? Like, is that kind of available for them, and do they feel like they can access it? And the answer is mostly no. There's massive stigma, and I think that plays a really big part. Like I think someone earlier was talking about how we often speak about women should do something, but there is a lot that needs to be focused on men and like male psychology and the kind of, I don't know, like I said, the cold, hard cage of masculinity.
That's true.
So you know how difficult my job is, Tarika? You know how difficult my job is.
Yeah. Lee, were you going to say something?
No. Yeah, I agree with what Tarika was saying. Is that I think also there's actually quite a lot of organizations that deal with sort of addressing men's possibly the psychological like harm that they have been receptacle to because of the abusive past that they had, and also addressing men who were once abusers. So there are organizations that provide programs where they actually talk about issues of patriarchy and how their misguided understanding of women and the relationship towards women should change. And so those are discussions that we need to have, the discussions of how men can be able to transform from their sort of toxic ideas of what it means to be a man, to become more gender sensitive and to be more pro-feminist to an extent. So that's something that we definitely need to bring into discussion.
Okay. All right, thank you so much for that. For the next few questions, I am going to ask that we just try, as this conversation is, I'm going to ask that we just try and keep the answers like a little shorter for the time. But we've only got a few more questions left, and then we're going to look at, I think, some questions that the viewers had as well. So the next question, which I think you all pretty much covered already, is how important do you think the role of race plays in the discussions of GBV? Or do you think it is primarily a cultural thing, which I think a lot of you have. Anything you want to add to that? Speak.
Gaho, ask the question again. Ask me again. Oh, I sound like I'm in a movie. I'm not going to say this. I'm in a movie. Ask me again. What did you say?
How important do you think, important a role do you think race plays in the discussions of gender-based violence? Or do you think it is primarily a cultural thing? Yes, Tarika.
So I think I'd like to say that it has nothing inherently to do with different races, but it has to do with systemic oppression. So racial trauma not actually only like it affects your DNA, but it also affects your behavior. Regardless of racial trauma, there's also the economic baggage that may come with systemic oppression. So Black and Brown communities, you will often see that GBV is higher, sometimes higher in those communities. And it is not because these people are Black or Brown. It is because of systemic oppression. So yes, race plays a role, but that's only because we live in a racist world.
Okay. Thank you.
And just a quick addition to Tarika. Once again, she's got it spot on. Yikes! Where's another plug coming up? Anything that has to do with physical intimacy and emotional intimacy tends to be a no-go area across all races and cultures. But it seems to be more pronounced in those that are in the majority and on the receiving end of racism. Now, I'm saying this a little bit slowly because I want to say, because I did say it earlier, there are things called culture and tradition. Culture is dynamic. It's never static, it changes. But when it comes to anything that has to do with gender relations, gender roles, power, you don't find any changes there. Like somebody said, I think it was Paimo, you can go and have your degree and all of that there, but you will come in here and you will go into your voorskot and you will get in here and you will scrub and do this for us. You are the makoti, you're going to do this. It doesn't matter how educated you are. You come from your job, you come back and be a woman in this house. Okay? Now, I find a little bit of research that I also did, Slee. I find that in the other communities, there is some conversation. It may not be very deep also, but there is some conversation. We don't speak. And I find that, for instance, in some households, you find that particularly with the men, the boys, they're still boys at the time, once there isn't a male figure at home, those conversations are even further away from that person in particular. So the mother will do all she can, because all the single mothers are amazing at transcending all of these limitations and boxes and stuff. But you also will still find that there will be can you ask the uncle to come and speak to the boys? Can you ask grandfather to come and speak to the boys and stuff like that? So those conversations are very hard to come by. And I'm only talking about conversations, just conversations, not actually dealing with the issues, but the conversations themselves. So yes, we have a system that entrenches all of that. But I think we also have this staticness of the culture that we seem not to be able to break. Tradition, on the other hand, is something that you can set yourself. You can set your own tradition. And we don't seem to be able to be quick to do that. Perhaps you guys, because you're coming after us, speaking for myself, you guys come after us. And perhaps you guys will really like rise to the occasion and just grab it by the, not by the other parts, by the horns, and just do it. You know, and just do it, because you guys have nothing to lose. You guys have absolutely nothing to lose. You're the barrier breakers. You're the barrier breakers and the trendsetters.
Okay, thank you, Bev. I'm sorry, I do have to cut you short. We are kind of running low on time, so I'm just going to. The next two questions, I think I'm going to direct it at certain panelists just to hear your views about them. It's just a couple questions now. Paimo, can I ask you a question? Can I ask, are you happy with the way the conversation concerning culture and gender-based violence is currently being conducted?
For me personally, I don't think they really, in all honesty, I'll be honest to say, not really working. Because when I'm in Johannesburg, I'm with my Johannesburg family and so forth, and you really see people like, you can talk back to your mom and say, Mom, you can't say that about gay people, you can't say that about race, or this, because like they have their prejudices from a pre-apartheid time. But when I go to Nongoma, which is a very small rural area in KZN, I go to my cousins and all these things, it's one where, as much as we're having these conversations, the backlash that you see from people within our spaces is 1,000 times worse in their spaces, because it's one of those that they're so deeply entrenched in their culture and what they believe in and the role that they play as a man, and what they want is that it's deep enough to say that their dreams, their achievements all revolve around that. Because when I speak to my cousins, it's always one of saying that they always imagine their future as being, they come home from work, they see their wife who's been cooking all day, and they meet their wife for sex. And it's one of those things where you put women into such a box. But as much as I want to say, okay, fine, you know, we're progressive, I can explain to you, a majority of South Africans live like my cousins in Nongoma. And many of them live in those rural areas that are very run by your culture, culture, Sesotho, and all these things. And many of them have those ideals. And as much as Auntie Babi did say we're the ones to change it, we have to make a greater effort in changing all of us, because, we have to make a greater effort in changing all of us, because there's so many people coming from different areas that I've got a mindset that's almost 20 years old, 30 years old, almost 100 years old.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Next question that I think I'm actually going to direct to Slee and Tarika as well. In light of everything we've just discussed, do you think women have a right to be angry, or are we just being emotional?
Right, because we are emotional beings.
Yeah, apparently
we cry with everything. We are irrational, right? So yeah, no, we do have the right to be angry. To be angry for ourselves, to be angry for our sisters, to be angry for our friends, those kind of things. We have the right to express our emotions because our emotions have always been turned down. And what I mean by turned down, as in we are meant to fulfill this role of this is what a woman should do. And I think, Bev, I think you explained it very well of these are the particular things that a woman should, do. The Makoti has to do this. Like Paimo, you also explained it well. So it's almost like we had to be quiet, to be submissive, and not say anything, right? Not express how we actually feel, right? But this is the time when we can actually be like, you know what? I don't agree with this, and I'm going to say it. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Tarika, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think not only do we have the right to be angry and deeply angry, but I also think we have the responsibility to be, because I think there are many young girls, for example, or maybe even women who have somewhat internalized sexism or misogyny, and all of us, like as a collective sisterhood, have a responsibility to be angry, because if we aren't collectively angry, I don't see the energy carrying on in the way that it needs to carry on.
Yes, that's true.
All right, thank you. Paimo, I actually want to ask you as well. Do you think women have the right to be angry, or are we just being emotional?
I think you guys definitely have the right to be angry. However, I also think you guys have been angry for too long, and men aren't angry enough.
I like that answer.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. So we are running short of time, so I'm going to wrap up my end of questioning here. Has been looking at the chats for the questions that the viewers have sent in, even though I have seen that some of you have gone in and answered them in the chat already. But Chita has gathered a couple that I'm going to hand over to her now to just go ahead and ask.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, thank you for such an insightful conversation. It was very enlightening, educational, and we were getting a few questions throughout the discussion, but a lot of you were actually looking at the questions and answering them as we were moving along. And I noticed that some of the questions are touching on topics that we will actually be addressing in the upcoming episodes relating to culture, women's roles, how they respond to them, how men respond to certain roles. But I know, Beverly, there was a question you briefly answered, but I was hoping maybe the other panelists could also give a bit of insight on this question. So someone asked, do you think non-governmental organizations such as organized religion have a role in the support against GBV?
Chita, did you say against or against GBV?
In the supporting GBV.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Sorry, can I answer? I do believe that they play a role. Actually, last year, I did a research for my honors on human trafficking, specifically how religious organizations play a role in human trafficking. So, when it comes to the church and any religious affiliations, they come in a more holistic manner when it comes to, helping the victims specifically when they've experienced trauma, when they've experienced those kind of situations. So the church and the religious affiliations, they have a way in which they conduct their programs that are spiritual and help the victim. So it's not always the case that the victim respond well to it, but a lot of these victims they get healing through these sort of restorative programs. So I would say yes, they do play a role in a different kind of way that some organizations may approach in another manner. So yes, I definitely do think they have a role.
Yes. Tarika, you want to expand?
Yeah, I want to touch on this quickly because I think it's quite complicated, but I do think religions are inherently patriarchal. I think, you know, religious affiliations cannot be, and they can challenge that. But I think, for example, even let's just talk about Adam and Eve quickly as a story. I think Eve was the original sinner. So that's just one example of many in which the way women are portrayed. I mean, even if we're also talking about Virgin Mary, how that was a sort of a miracle, and she couldn't have just had sex. She had to be like pure. And I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I have to like go into that more. But anyways, it's all about purity, and it's a very specific, it's very specific like form of femininity. And yeah, I think that does carry through in people's beliefs. I'm not saying it's the be all and end all, because many people think separately from these religious texts, but I do think there are many people who just simply don't.
Yeah.
Okay. Kaho, did I read the question wrong? What are they asking, if NGOs in those spaces basically perpetuate or they help victims? Because I all of a sudden I'm kind of a little confused now.
I was gonna ask after as well. One of the follow-up questions I was gonna ask is whether they are also supporting the fight against GBV. So first, I wanted to see what role they're playing in like against GBV, and what role they're playing in supporting the gender-based violence movement.
Okay.
So would you like to comment?
I know that a lot of churches and organizations have been addressing GBV in their church environments or in their religious environments, and so it's being spoken about. So it has been, you know, it's being addressed basically. So they have, but I hear where you're coming from, Tarika, where there's the issue of patriarchy that comes into place, where it's like a lot of people affiliate, you know, religion and a lot of these kind of sort of mixed feelings about it, right? So I think it is a different perspectives for different people, but definitely I think there is organizations that are forefront about it and have made initiatives where they have, you know, have programs, they've had group sessions with the victims, they've spoken about the GBV cases and so forth in the church, and so I think definitely there is a way which they have been in the forefront of GBV, but in a more spiritual manner. Yes.
Okay.
Interesting. Tiki, Tarika, would you like to comment?
Sure, I completely agree, Slee. And I think it's also important to touch on the fact that religious organizations or religious institutions are also great ways to bring the community together. So I remember, I mean, there was one drive, for example, that was held at a church that we were kind of collecting rape kits and putting together these things for police stations, and just the kind of community that those institutions bring can be really powerful and really important. So I think, you know, we can look at the patriarchal aspect, but we can also look at the power of a community aspect in that regard. Yeah.
Can I quickly apologize? To say that I saw the question. No, sorry, man. I just saw the one side of the question. I'm sorry. I just saw the one side of the question, and that's why I responded to say they have a critical role to play and they should be supported. I didn't see the kind of pregnancy in it. And sheesh. And I completely, never mind.
No worries. I mean, you're not completely off topic either, that they do have a critical role. Whether they are for GBV or against it, they do have quite a lot of influence as an institution, as a connection of people. Yeah.
Well, from my side, I noticed that most of the questions you guys already addressed, and some of them, as I mentioned before, will be addressed in the upcoming episodes. So thank you for answering the questions that were brought up, and that's all from me.
Okay, thank you, Chito. So that brings us to the conclusion of our discussion. And oh my goodness, you guys. Thank you so much for being a part of this. This was such an amazing conversation. Like I've heard things and perspectives that I've never even like thought of or even considered before. So thank you so much for coming and being open and honest and just enlightening the situation as a whole. I know towards the end I did have to rush you, but I think this is such a big, complicated, intricate issue that we can't sit here for an entire day and like just still wouldn't talk about everything, you know, all of that. So I think with what we did get through, it was absolutely amazing, absolutely enlightening, and yeah, thank you so much. Just to talk to the viewers, thank you for joining this chat. Thank you for tuning.
Thank you guys.
We have been recording this session, so the plan is to upload this to some sort of platform. I think it's going to be our IGTV, our Muse Afrika IGTV. I think that's where we're going to find this discussion if you do want to refer back to it, or maybe get other people to tune in and watch it as well. And we do have these gender-based violence discussions. We're having them throughout the month of August. So there's another one next week Sunday and the following Sunday and so forth. But do follow our social media accounts at muse.africa on Instagram. That's where a lot of our updates are happening. And yeah, also just a quick thing, feedback, that would be absolutely amazing. From panelists and viewers alike, we would absolutely appreciate, hearing back from you, what you thought of the way this was conducted.
You sure?
Any notes? Absolutely anything. Honestly, if you thought that, I don't know, you liked the background in one video, or you liked this question, or whatever, anything you want to add, notes of improvement from viewers and panelists alike, I think we'll absolutely appreciate that. And I think that's all from my side. I think that's everything. Yeah.
Bayamo said we get seasonal when we talk about gender-based violence.
Yes.
Now I'm hearing you, Gaho, say these conversations are only in August, and I remember hearing that August is Women's Month. You'll better be carrying these on beyond August.
You know
otherwise
what?
You are seasonal. Otherwise,
you know what? I hear you. I hear you. Thank you. We'll take this. The plan is to definitely continue this past Women's Month. But it being seasonal, even though it really shouldn't be, this is the time when everyone is like tuning into this kind of conversation.
Yes.
We make the biggest impact with this kind of conversation. But I think as an organization, as Muse, we definitely want to continue these kind of chats further than this platform, even though I think that this was a fantastic start. This was like a wildly successful start to the whole chat. And yeah, thank you to everyone for tuning in, for giving your time to us. To our panelists, again, special thank you. We appreciate you taking time out to chat to us about this. And hopefully this isn't the last time we see you, actually. I think we're very, very excited to chat to you guys more about this, because I think you have some very, very amazing and very insightful views on the topic, and you all are amazing people. So thank you.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Tarika.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Good night.
Okay, thanks.
We're gonna
Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.